This evening. This is our second annual Women in STEM panel. One thing that you might not know is this panel was actually put on by a group of students at Cañada who are women in STEM. So we really appreciate all of you coming out here and supporting us and for hearing the great insight that these wonderful ladies have to offer us. The reason why we created this community is we found that as we got higher up in the math classes, in the science classes, computer science classes, all of the classes we were going on that were STEM focused, we could start to count on one hand, usually, how many other women we saw in the room with us. And that's a unique experience, I would say, to the 5 women students in the room. And we wanted to ensure that we built a system here at Cañada early on in our careers to help support each other and to encourage each other to keep going through even when physics is not very fun. And we thank you so much for showing up tonight and supporting us. This means so much. And if you'd like to get involved, we'll have more information at the end of the panel. But to get started, I'm going to introduce our lovely moderators. We have Aline, Ganem, and then Shannon, Erin. I should have practiced that before, my bad. Come on up.
My name is Shannon Erin. I'm a physics major. I've been at Cañada for about 3 years at this point.
Hi, my name is Aline. My major is neurobiology. Also, there's ASCC, campaigning, voting thing happening, and I'm running for Senator at Large for STEM, so it'll be great for you guys to vote. Free choice, so you guys can vote for whoever. So, I think there's a link on their Facebook page to vote, and you must have an updated ID to vote. So, hello panelists. And we're gonna start with our first question. Oh yeah, I'm so sorry about that. Okay, first we're gonna introduce our panelists. We have Susan Mahoney, Corinne Sadlowski, and Sarah Tariq, and Erin Bailie. So feel free to talk about yourselves. Just your name and your path. Yeah.
Hi everybody, Corinne Sadlowski. So I'll give you just super quick overview. So my major was philosophy, not anything to do with science when I first started, so I'll talk about that a little bit later. I have a Ph.D. in organic chemistry, and I did my undergrad in organic chem, and I did end up doing a degree in philosophy as well. And I graduated in 2008, right when the economy crashed, so no jobs, and it was a really great time to go to grad school. So I went to grad school at University of Vermont, did all my schooling East Coast, and then after I finished, I decided to look for grad school or postdocs that were just warm. So I only looked for postdocs in Florida and California. And I ended up finding one in California, so I went to UC Berkeley for my postdoc, and I joined the Department of Bioengineering and did some drug delivery there, and some med chem as well.
Hi, my name is Erin Bailie. I studied mechanical engineering at MIT, and then I promptly did not do anything related to mechanical engineering. I learned software engineering on the job at my first job, which was in Palo Alto, and then I've been at my current company, Samsara, for a little over a year, where I manage software and mechanical engineers.
Hi, my name is Tariq. I'm a computer scientist. I've been in this industry 15 years. I studied computer science before that. Right now, I work in a self-driving car company, so we are owning and operating a fleet of vehicles that we built from the ground up, driving in San Francisco right now. Before that, I was at NVIDIA, so done a variety of different jobs inside computer science.
Hi, my name is Susan Mahoney, and I'm a professor here, so I know many of you. I did my undergrad in environmental science and was very interested in water, so I continued on working in state and federal jobs in groundwater, Pollution Control Agency in Minnesota, and then the Forest Service in Idaho, and then eventually went to graduate school for hydrologic sciences. And somewhere along the path in graduate school, when I was stretching that out as long as I could because it was such a fun gig, I started teaching and decided that that was something I really wanted to pursue. So here I am at Cañada.
Thank you. We're going to start with our first question. First question is, what was your parents' or your reaction to or choice of major? How did that affect your decision?
Okay, 2 minutes on the clock. So I forgot to mention, I went to University of New Hampshire for undergraduate, and I joined as an undeclared major in the sciences. So I knew I liked science, but wasn't exactly sure what. I came back from my first semester home and told my parents that I took this intro to philosophy class and I absolutely loved it, and it was going to be a philosophy major. And up until that point, my parents were super supportive, and my dad said, no you're not, and you're welcome to be a philosophy professor, but you need to tell me what you're going to do with that. So they were still really supportive, but I went back to school, and luckily the next semester I had to take organic chemistry, and that was kind of like the make or break class. You were going to go to med school or you weren't going to go to med school, depending on how you did in organic chem. And I just had an amazing teacher who just was super passionate about chemistry. He just taught how logical it was. And instead of being in a class of over 200 people, I decided to switch my major to chemistry and ended up being in a class of about 5 people. I think about 5 of us graduated. And my parents were much happier with that decision. But they were always really supportive, but just gently guiding me along to something that would be a profitable future.
All right. Thank you, Corinne.
I'm really lucky. My family's very supportive. They wanted me to study music performance because I like to play trombone in high school. And thankfully, I was like, I like doing my math homework more than I like practicing trombone. So I think I should go to math school instead. But I came in intending to be mechanical engineering. I studied mechanical engineering. Kind of picked the right thing from the start and was really lucky with that.
All right, thank you.
So I thought I was going to be a doctor like my whole life, and my parents were super behind that decision. It's a really safe field to go in, lots of money there. And then around the time I was 15, I took these courses. I realized that I actually hated anything to do with like touching organs and things. And this is not going to work out. And so from that moment on, like I tried a lot of different things. Like I was studying just physics, and then pure mathematics, and then economics. And then by the time I came to computer science, my parents were used to this indecision of like, every year a different major. And ironically, the thing that they were concerned about was, what am I going to do with computer science? Like, what is the job prospects for computer science? I know that is funny compared to physics. But, they're like, yeah, go do whatever you want to do. And it turned out okay, yeah.
When I went to college, my family didn't know anything about college, and I didn't know anything about college. And so I just took classes until my junior year when an academic advisor called me in and said, you have to choose a major. And so I had no clue what I wanted to do. They looked at my academic transcript and said, wow, you're well and over halfway to an environmental science major. And I was like, sweet, I'm an environmental science major. So I didn't have a lot of thought about what I wanted to do. I was just taking classes that were interesting to me. And my family didn't understand or anything about the higher education system, and they were just pleased that I was happy and studying, and they were sure I was going to have a good life somehow,
All right, thank you all for your input. That was all very good input. So the second question is, what was the biggest challenge that you faced as a woman in your field? Was there ever a time in your education that you wanted to quit? And how have you overcome these obstacles if you had them?
Okay, a lot of questions for 2 minutes.
Yeah, we can remind you.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
So first, I just want to mention that in my experience as an undergrad, I didn't know I was a woman in science. I didn't know that there was a differential between the normal people in science and then a woman in science. I didn't have that experience as an undergrad. I only felt that when I went to graduate school. And the reason that I felt that is because I joined a department at the University of Vermont where the entire department, including all of the support staff, were all males. And that was like super weird. Not one female professor in the entire chemistry department or physics. We were both joint, and not a female support staff whatsoever. The only female that was employed was the glassblower. We had a glassblower on campus. So the department had been trying for a very long time to recruit women to the department, but there's kind of a trickle-down effect. The bigger schools will recruit the women because we have a differential problem, and then the smaller schools end up not recruiting as many. So I didn't realize until graduate school that there was a difference. And The second reason why I think there was, it became a challenge to me is the way that men tend to interact. So my PI, my graduate advisor, was a man, and it was his first tenure track position, so I joined his lab during his first year. So he was still trying to figure out how to do science and also be a leader and a manager. And I think just that right there is just too much. A lot of times you join a department and they don't give you any training, they just say, here's a lab, figure it out. So not to his fault at all, but his management style was very different than what my personality responded to. He learned from his boss, who learned from his previous boss. His complete lineage was, here's a problem, figure it out, work really hard to get there, and I'm not going to help you on the way, but I will congratulate you when you get there. So his was more mentorship of not encouragement, which I respond to personally, and I think a lot of women tend to respond to good communication back and forth. It was more of a challenge, and you need to meet that challenge, and if you don't meet that challenge, then you disappointed me. And so that took anytime I came across failure, which across science that's how we learn, that's how science grows, lots of failure. So I would say like 90% of what I did was failed work in grad school, failed reactions, and constantly having the response of not encouragement, like, okay, this didn't work, that's okay, it's just nature, this didn't work, let's figure out another way to get this chemical reaction to work.
Thank you.
I did not have that, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good.
I think the biggest challenge that I face is establishing credibility when I'm meeting someone or interacting with a group of people for the first time. And I notice how it comes off in aggression, or I can be really egocentric sometimes when I'm meeting with clients for the first time. But I've found some ways that I can establish credibility and show people that I am technical from the get-go. So one example is I do interview a lot of people who are trying to get hired to my company. And oftentimes when I'm interviewing someone who has an engineering background, they see the word manager in my title and they may not realize that I have a computer science background or a mechanical engineering background. And so I'll start to ask really technical questions from the get-go to make them to show them that I can rationalize about the system in a technical way, and that's my motivation in being in this interview. And I notice that it just clicks. Instead of explaining something to me like I'm 5 years old, or treating a system like it's a black box and be like, oh, the code runs. I'm like, no, tell me about how the code runs. Tell me what you did, tell me what the system did, tell me what the outcome was. So that's one method that I use. The other thing that I do is I lean on my male allies as much as I can. So before a big meeting, if I have a male counterpart from my company or my team in the room, I'll ask them to pretend that they don't know the answer to a hard question if they know that I do know the answer. Because then they'll say, oh, all of the men in the room turn and ask the man from my company what the answer to a question is. And he says, actually, I think Erin knows the answer better than I can. And he turns to me as a technical expert. It's just a simple thing that a male ally can do, and it helps me establish so much credibility at the start of a meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Insights.
So I don't know if this is something that women face disproportionately, but one of the things that has challenged me throughout my career is really trying to say, like, is what I'm doing worth it? And as I've grown older, and especially since I've had my child, I care deeply about the work that I'm doing. Is it meaningful to people? And so inside computer science, this is sometimes hard. Like, what we're doing is always interesting and it's fun, but is it making a difference in people's lives? And that's one thing that at times has made me seriously reconsider, like, is what I'm doing what I want to do the rest of my life? Like, when I'm 60, when I'm 80, will I really be happy? Like, hey, I spent all of this time, the large majority of my time, doing something that was, in the end, helpful for people. And so that's something that I've continuously used as a forcing function in my life and in my career. Like, yes, it's fun, it's maybe stable, but is it really worth it? And really thinking, like, okay, when I'm much older, am I going to enjoy looking back on these years and saying, hey, you did something really, really meaningful. So that's.
For me, I think I can definitely identify a time when I felt like quitting, which is I'm not someone that usually feels that way. That's why I think I can identify that. In graduate school, I felt I had impostor syndrome a big time, meaning that I didn't really feel like I belonged. I didn't know how the educational system went. I went to a small liberal arts college, so I didn't have this science background of students that had come from a university. And as Corinne was saying, science is a lot about failure, so all my initial lab experiences in graduate school, I felt like they weren't going as I planned, and I just thought, well, maybe this isn't for me. And then I went to a conference where a Ph.D. student I was working with, I was a master's student, was presenting some of my work as part of a larger project. And he presented it with such confidence and like, this is the way it is, and he was so sure of it and everything. I was like, yeah, sorry, we don't, there's so much uncertainty here. This was wrong and this was wrong. He's like, no, just his presence and the way that he presented it made me realize half the time he doesn't know what he's talking about either, but he's able to project this, right? And yeah, there was some good ideas in the work that I was doing. I was only seeing the problems, and I wasn't being able to grasp onto the things that were working and that would allow us to go forward. So again, at that moment, right before that conference, I was thinking, oh, this isn't going to really be for me. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And then after realizing that some of it is bravado and facade of the confidence that some of my colleagues were showing, then I realized that I could do this too.
Thank you. In your current job, what is the environment like as a woman, and how has that affected your career? Have you seen the work environment change?
Okay, I'll be quicker this time. So my very first job in industry, I was the only woman that joined the company, and it was very apparent that I was kind of the token woman in the room. Just little things like all of the bottle caps were way too tight. I had to help for somebody to help me take stuff off the shelf. There's a lot of physical labor in organic chemistry, and there's just stuff that's like not built for my height. So just little micro changes like that of like, maybe don't screw this on so tight. Really helps just make somebody else aware of the differences that we have. And in my current position, there are a lot of women. So there's only 2 in our chemistry department, but we also have a biology department, and there's lots of women. So it's a little bit different than my last company. But I do have to say, chemists bringing, what you can bring to the table is just your differences, and you don't need to shout them on the rooftops. They can be very small, but when people realize, oh, I didn't even know that this was a problem, or this is something that you look at differently, people really want to welcome you. And I think something that's different in industry versus academia is academia tends to be really competitive. You're kind of challenged by your peers because whoever gets the next paper, the biggest paper out, or does the best chemistry really is going to project their career. Where in industry, people really want to work with you. It's a team effort, and it really is a team effort. So when you're in an environment where it's really a team effort, they want to see you succeed. Both people succeeding really projects the company forward. So I think just those little micro changes are really positive impact.
Yeah, sometimes I think that being a woman is my secret superpower. So I was the first woman who joined my team at my company. There were 6 men and me, and it wasn't until we were like 15 or 20 people that another woman joined. But in that 6 months where I was the only woman on the team, a vice president of a different organization, so someone who had no direct responsibility for my success within the company, every week, at least once a week, she would message me on Slack. She'd be like, let's get lunch. She would ask me, how are things going? What are the things that are frustrating you this week? And she wasn't being, overt over my head about like, I'm gonna mentor you. But I had this voice of someone who's been in industry for 15 or 20 years and has a lot of experience and has so much to teach me. And she was really looking out for me. And that was something that I'm really grateful I didn't even have to work for. She saw that I might need that resource, and she made herself available. It's like a secret superpower.
So, like I said, I've been in the industry like 15 years, and before that I was in school, and during all that time I had exactly the same experience that everybody else has had. You know, you're the only person sometimes in a class or in a meeting or in a team. At the worst, I was one woman in a team of maybe 40 people. I don't know how we managed that. Maybe they were all like gamers, I'm not sure. And so yeah, like, even if you're not feeling this from people, it's not sexism, it's not that somebody is shortchanging you, you will always have in the back of your head this question of like, am I really good enough? Do I really belong here? Am I doing everything that I need to be doing? Am I smart? And yeah, it's just sort of like overcoming those doubts in your own head, because I don't feel, and this might be different, like everybody's experience is different. I haven't felt overtly that people have been sexist towards me. And in fact, I feel like I've gotten very lucky. Somehow I've gotten the right mixture of mentors, managers, professors that have looked out for people. But even then, you have to tell yourself that you can do this, and take advantage of these opportunities like you had, but make your own opportunity, right? Like somebody might not reach out to you, but you have to go and say like, hey, okay, this project, I feel like I can do it. Take on more than you're given. Do it really well. Voice your opinion. Stand behind your results. Don't shy away. Like get in there, get a seat on the table, and that's how you move forward. So you have to make those opportunities for yourself as well.
That was really good input. Thank you.
Well, as a community college teacher, there are more women in community college teaching than there are men. But even when I started 20 years ago, there was about 46% women, and now it's reversed, or it's switched, it's maybe 54, 56% women, so it's even continues to go up. So in community college teaching, it's fairly women dominated. My experience in my field in geoscience was very different. In graduate school, I was often one of 2 or 3 people in a class of 30, or 2 or 3 women in a class of 30. In my professional experiences, it was a little more equal or closer, I guess, but geosciences is fairly male-dominated still today. I think overcoming that, I didn't have any, let me backtrack. I think overcoming that is finding community and finding mentors, and that's part of it. And doing what you can to also be a mentor. I can remember in graduate school, I didn't really think of myself as a mentor, but looking back, I was mentoring some of the undergrad women in hydrology program for sure. I'll give an example of another friend of mine. In geology, you do field camp. After you're done as an undergrad, you do a 4-week intensive field camp, and where you're out in the field and working on real-world problems and learning geological mapping. And one of my friends in that situation, there were 6 women in the field camp and 60 men, and so or 45 men or something like that. Anyway, they decided to put one woman in each group, right? Because then they would have diverse groups. From the women's perspective that did that was just like the worst thing. Like, can you give me some camaraderie when I'm out camping for 4 weeks with all these people? Whereas the professors thought that this was a way to kind of mix up make it more diverse. And so, my friend that went through that, she actually then contacted the professors afterward and said, and explained it. And sure enough, the next year, the same field camp, they actually let kind of the students decide how to break up, and they had groups of 4 women out of the 6, and did it differently. So I guess my telling that story is just to say, mentoring is important, and then also you can be a mentor, and you can speak up, and you can help make small changes that can really affect people.
Okay, thank all of you. So the next question is number 4. What opportunities do you wish you had taken advantage of early on in your college and in your professional career?
So the first thing I wish I did was go to office hours. I never went to office hours, and I always felt like, especially in big classes, you're kind of just a number, and there was always, you could tell the people in the class who sat in the front, and they were at office hours, and they were always asking questions, and those people get like a personalized education. They're getting more out of that class than you are if you're sitting at the back, and I always sat at the back and was quiet and I would get too nervous to ask questions because I was afraid of asking something that would sound stupid, so I didn't do it. And I really wish I did, because professors want to help you. It is their job to get you to understand the work, and it affects your grades, and your grades have real-world effects. And I was too embarrassed if I got a really bad grade on a test, so my first organic chemistry class, C+. And that's what I do now, full-time. And I wish I wasn't embarrassed to go ask for help and say, I don't know this, and I want to know it, and just have that confidence. I think that's a big part of it, is just having the confidence to be okay in failing, and realizing I can be resilient and move through this and learn. We're all capable of learning. So that's one thing I wish I took advantage of. And the second is site visits. So I don't know if that's something that you do here, but just looking at different opportunities. Being in academia, it's very, there was this big pressure to stay in academia, at least in my graduate division, of you should be a professor, you should go down a specific trajectory and don't look left or right. And you don't want to talk to those people. You want to make sure that you have advisors and advocates that look out for whatever path that you have in your future, and you should explore multiple different pathways, because that's how I figured out that I did not want to be a professor. My PI told me, if you're not going to be an academic professor, you're wasting my time getting a Ph.D. And now I look at that and laugh, like, haha, you know, that's not the only job. That was not good advice. So find the people that are going to be supportive for you, seek out asking questions, and get a good support group, because that's what's going to get you through like the really tough academic work.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking about this this morning. The big thing that came up for me was study abroad programs. My college had a couple of study abroad programs, both for credit and then some that were during our January semester or our summer term that weren't necessarily for academic credit. And I was always like, oh, I have to take the classes that I'm supposed to take and take extra electives so I can look extra appealing on applications and do all the internships and do the extra stuff. And I never gave myself the space to like go do something fun, even if the purpose was just to go do something fun and the opportunity was there. Most people only get to go to college once. It's this unique environment where you can really explore things for the sake of learning. That's really, really hard to do once you go into industry or once you leave an academic environment. If I wanted to go spend 3 months in another in another country teaching English and trying to learn another language and like seeing the sites and the history, that would be really hard to do. Like I would lose a lot of job security. And so give yourself this, like know what the minimum requirements are for your program, for your goals, for your dreams, but give yourself the space to kind of slack on some of those extra things and kind of be selective about what are the extra things I'm doing because I know I want to do them, and what are the extra things I'm doing because I feel like I have to do them, and then don't do things you don't want to do.
So I sort of had a different experience. I was that person in the front. It was like super motivated by grade and by like this is the coursework and I have to do this and I have to nail it and I have to like get everything answered. And I think that's super important, but I wish I had taken a little bit of time to just be curious. So curious about, and maybe this applies more to computer science because there is so much more out there than the class or the project or the little bit that your professor is teaching you. It's enormous. And if I had that time, if I could go back, I'd love to just do projects, take up little bits of like, oh, I want to learn about this, or I want to train this network, or I want to try out something, and just write some little code, put it on Git. I wish I had done that sort of thing.
Right, I'm the opposite of that. I told you I didn't pick a degree until I was halfway through my junior year, so I was all about exploring. I studied abroad. I took all sorts of courses. In graduate school, I took tractor driving. It's a time to explore, and I totally agree. Maybe that's another question, advice you could give. I agree with what you're saying. Try different things and explore, and that not only does it help you learn new things, but it also takes the edge off a little bit. It allows you to focus when you need to focus. But for me, I would say, echo what Corinne said, that going to office hours, I don't just say that because I'm a professor now, but going to office hours and asking questions would have helped me a lot more. I talk all the time now, I'm a professor, but I don't think I asked a question in college, period. Okay? I never spoke up in class. I was always afraid I was going to sound not knowledgeable enough. I was willing to take all sorts of risks by taking funky classes and by doing strange extracurricular activities or strange jobs, but in the classroom I felt a little constrained, and I think I could have got more out of my professors and out of my classes had I been willing to take a risk in the classroom and ask questions and go to office hours.
Yeah, so one thing that, I'm forgetting who said this, but it was just, you said be curious, like just ask what's outside of what's specifically on the syllabus for a course. You can learn that at office hours. I remember I was at office hours once, and a graduate student who was our teaching assistant was explaining the homework problem and then said, actually, no, a better example is for all of you to go up 2 floors and come to my lab and I'll show you this. It's a different system, but the basic equations still apply. And he showed us his research. And that was a really great learning opportunity, both for how to solve my homework and get a good grade, which was nice, but also for what research looks like in the real world and what he was actually working on, who he was as a human, why he was excited about teaching the class. So office hours can be really, really great.
Thank you, panelists. Fifth question is, how do you practice self-care and motivate yourself to succeed in your field?
So self-care for me is exercise. I think exercise is just absolutely necessary for the human body, whether you hate it or not. Just do exercise that is, hiking or something that's not considered actual exercise. That for me is something that you can't really think when you're trying to push weights in the air. You can't think about work. It's a really good way of just kind of a distraction. And it does something to your body too, where you get a lot of energy and endorphins, and so that really helps with stress. And stress for me it's a physical manifestation. It goes someplace. When I first switched my major to organic chemistry, my first round of finals, I broke out in hives, like all over. Looked like a witch, hives everywhere, and I had no idea what it was from. And then went to the emergency room, and they just said, "You're too stressed out. You need to calm down." So it goes someplace. You need to do something with your stress. It's going to do something to you, and it's not good if you don't deal with it. So I think just managing stress is really important for self-care. So for me, it's hiking, going outside here in Vermont. It's really cold, so ski, or you got to just bundle up and take a run outside. Is that the whole question?
Yes. Food helps out with stress as well.
Can I curse?
Yes.
Because I highly recommend having a fuck-it bucket. And this is just a small bucket or other item next to your bed, and you take all the fucks that you have for the day and you put them in the fuck-it bucket. And you don't think about them while you're trying to sleep. So I guess people would call that sleep hygiene or like having a good sleep habit, but the fuck-it bucket is very, very important. And it's kind of similar to it. You can't think about school or work when you're pushing weights in the air. So I think knowing the systems that you need to do to be able to like carve out human time for your brain as opposed to just student time for your brain, and that carries into the work world as well.
Yeah, so with a family and with work, it feels like there's never enough time to do all of these things, like take care of yourself and do what's enjoyable. So I still think that it's really important, and the way that I found I can manage this is to get my family interested in the things that are interesting for me. So, what about if we go do XYZ? So yeah, exactly, exercise, like go outside, play something. I really wanted to learn guitar, and so I was like, hey, son of mine, let's go play guitar together. And so now we're learning guitar. And it's just a really fun thing because I enjoy being with my child and I enjoy learning this new thing.
Yeah, what they all said. Finding another passion, ideally maybe that you can do with other people, so that can just take you away from things. In college, in undergrad especially, I didn't have problems with that, because I was taking all the classes that had field trips. That's how I chose my classes. I like to be outside, and so that's why I was taking my classes, and that's how I got a geology major, or undergrad minor. But so yeah, just finding some other passion that you can put some mental and physical energy into, and being active. That's good advice.
All right, thank you. So there's one final question. Before we go to audience questions, is there any other advice that you can give us, and what do you wish you could tell yourself when you were a freshman in college?
So the first bit of advice is professional. So what I've seen just across the field, at least in my specific STEM field, is that presentations are not really well done by most people, and that's something that really takes practice. And I think when you get really good at that, there's a lot of opportunities that can open up for you just by having good presentation skills. And I wish I could tell you how bad my very first talk I ever did in grad school was. It was embarrassing. I was sweating. I had like a lip smack thing going on. My jaw was like snap. I don't even know what was happening. But I didn't have the experience of presenting frequently and often enough, like a lot of people sometimes do. Some groups have weekly meetings where you have to present everything that you've worked on for the week and talk about your research and get familiar with it, whatever it is that you're doing, whatever your science is, get familiar with the lingo and the terminology and be able to say it easily so that it just comes off. And some of that just comes with not doing big presentations, but just talking all the time with your friends, your colleagues, your peers about what it is that you do to just get the language out. So that's one thing that I think I could see just across the board. Some people are really great scientists, but man, they can't tell you what they do, or you can't understand it. And a big part of, I think, STEM in general is just talking up here where everyone's listening down here. And you're not a good communicator if you can't explain to somebody what it is that you do. Everyone that you talk to should be able to understand what you do, even if they don't understand all the technical intricacies. And then the second piece of advice I would give is that it's going to get kind of morbid, but think about dying every day. Think about when you're old, you're 80, you're dying, your body's not working, maybe your mind is still there, maybe it's not. And are you going to be happy with what you did? So if you've had a near-death experience or you haven't, just think about it. I think about dying every morning. And it's terrible, but it really makes you live like, all right, this is my last day. You know, like you can't get rid of like the paperwork and, you know, I've got to do this reaction and other things, but there's still stuff that's like fully within your control. And if you're going to give up that hike that you wanted to do because you've got papers that you need to grade, don't, because you're gonna die.
All right, so going back to very, very pointed practical advice. I did 3 internships in college, and I think that was too many. I didn't get to do fun things, as I mentioned before. The internships were fun, but I wish I had explored all of the breadth of things that were available to me when I was still a student. But I do think doing one internship before you get a full-time job, whether that's being a graduate student researcher or working in industry, can be really, really impactful, because the first place you work has so much influence in how you think about things. And being able to see that as an internship, instead of having those rose-colored glasses influence the first 1 or 2 or 3 years of your career, can be really, really helpful for giving you perspective and context when you do kickstart your career. So if you have an opportunity to do an internship, if it's a work study, if it's a co-op, if it's over summer, I highly recommend that, just to get that perspective and get that mindset. The other one is that you get to define your own success, and there's lots of ways to get there. Unless you are a doctor or a lawyer, coming out of college, unless you were going into med school or law school, everyone has a 5-year plan, and no one actually follows through with that 5-year plan. Like 3 days into it, that 5-year plan has changed. So know what it is that you want to be happy. Don't define it based off of anyone else's expectations, and know that there's lots of different ways that you can get there. And so if your goal is to be, you know, the CEO of your own company, don't feel like you have to get this job so you can get this next job, so you can get this next job. Make one decision at a time. Give yourself the freedom to take whatever path will get you there, and just make the decisions that will guide you towards that without being like too prescriptive about what you do.
So I mentioned some of this earlier, but I think the thing that has helped me achieve success, and I think is really important, is do what you're supposed to do, right? Like if you're in school, do your classes. If you're at work, you're assigned a job, do that. Do it really well, but then do something even more than that. Like go and find what else needs doing, like when you're studying, what else is out there, like you mentioned, like what really does research in this field mean? What are all of the jobs that people are doing? What are the subfields that might be interesting for you? At work, seek out these opportunities that perhaps, you know, nobody else is looking at, that really could help set you up either for success, or more importantly, you know, are really important things that you would be happy doing. Try to do those jobs super well, because that leads to more opportunities and more opportunities. You don't have to motivate yourself with like, I'm going to be the CEO or whatever, you know, your end goal is, but it's about like, what am I doing right now? Does it make a difference to me? Does it make a difference to other people? How can I do this super well?
You've said a lot of what I was thinking of saying, but I would say echo what Corinne said about communication skills. You can never be too good of a communicator. So whether that's improving your writing skills, but then also your communication, your oral communication skills, being able to talk, to present yourself, to talk about your science, that's really vital, and it's going to help you at every level. Also, I think just be curious and take risks. Don't be afraid that something's not right on the path. Just be willing to explore. Because sometimes right now I know a lot of students are thinking about what school they're going to get accepted into because the UCs are all telling this week, right? And some students are very uptight about it. But sometimes the little decisions are the ones that really form our lives. It might be who you sat next to on the bus and you decided to strike a conversation that aligns you the next internship. So sometimes we get really worked up about the big decisions in our life, but just go with the flow, keep along on your path, and remember that some of these little decisions actually may be more influential.
Thank you.
So I think we are going to open this up to Q&A for the audience. Your microphone is about to die, so we're going to go ahead and just swap this one out. Great. Does anybody have any questions that they have prepared?
I know it was already mentioned kind of in the beginning, but what can future generations, both male and female, do to create a more equal workforce for the women in STEM?
So, is your question how do we get more representation of women in STEM, or how do we make the workplace more conducive for women, yeah?
Just how to make it a better community for women in STEM, both men, both men and women can do to make it a better environment.
So one of the things that I feel we lack in STEM is, so we see that women and minority are dropping down by the time we're in industry, ratios are really low. But at some point there were a lot of these women. And so what I'd love to do is really understand what happened, not in industry to discourage women to not be here, but what happened in high school. Like, how can we make that a better experience so that women that are, perfectly happy kids and teenagers studying math and physics suddenly decided, like, this is not for me. And I don't really know the answer to that. Like, is it that they're not seeing role models in industry? And so is the answer then more of us going out and talking at events and sort of showing that, there's myths and maybe some part of it with too, but industry is changing and it is actually a great experience for women and it's very fulfilling. And don't be afraid to take that chance and take that high school physics class, even if it is boring, because there's fun stuff ahead.
Yeah, I think the only other thing to add to that is we talk about the leaky pipeline, is that we have a lot of people who are interested in STEM when they're young, and then the pipeline leaks, and then we get to very few women who are in senior leadership in STEM. Is wherever you are along that pipeline, ask yourself how you're supporting those who are below you in the pipeline and ahead of you in the pipeline. How you are championing the women who are your leaders within your company, or championing to get a woman leader within your company or within your organization, and then how you are looking to the future generations and how are you supporting them? Are you giving them advice? Are you being present? Are you being visible? So just thinking about, you have your own life, but you also exist in this ecosystem, and how can you contribute to this ecosystem as a whole?
Both men and women can contribute to that, right? Because I think a diverse workplace, both in terms of gender and in terms of all other measures of diversity, is ideal.
Hi, a couple of you had mentioned having mentors or being mentors. Could you each explain or give us your definition of what is a mentor? And then can you give an example of one of your best mentor relationships or experiences?
I have the microphone, so let's start. Maybe a mentor for me is someone that listens, first of all, because in my experience in graduate school, I had one professor who the door was literally always open on her office, whereas some of the offices along the hall weren't, but it was more than that. It was really always open. You could just poke your head in for any reason, and somehow the conversation always ended up being really supportive. So I think a good mentor is listening and available, and then can offer little bits of encouragement along the way.
So in my company, we don't have a formal mentoring program, but I mentor a couple of younger ladies, so both software engineers, and our relationship is sort of, we have regular once a week meeting, and it's mostly, I am there to be a sounding board, to listen to what is going on in their lives, and either provide some technical advice, usually more how to deal with situations or how to deal with coworkers or managers, situations that I think they would be able to deal with fine, but it's nice to have somebody else to come and talk to. And you mentioned Sue, right? Like just having this community where you can turn to have like one other woman that you can say like, hey, this is going on, what should I do about it? And not feeling isolated and not having like somebody to talk to. So mostly it's that, just having like another person.
Yeah, I always think of mentors as people who I have these like person crushes on. Like, man, I just want to be you when I grow up. It's what they're doing with their lives, how impactful their work is, the attitude that they're bringing to the table is something that I really look up to, and I want to learn from them. The thing that I realized more recently in my career is that mentors really like mentoring. They're not doing it because they feel like they have to. They're not doing it because it's like the textbook thing you're supposed to do to help with diversity. They really get something out of it as well. So it can be a really symbiotic relationship. So it's someone who has no direct control over your career. They're not your manager. They can't promote you. But they care about you and they care about your success, and they're going to put in effort because they get something out of it as well.
I'm trying to think a lot about an actual mentor that I've had a consistent relationship with, and I can't put my finger on one, and I think that's just because I'll have kind of micro relationships with different people, and you get from them what you can, and I don't have somebody that I'm consistently going to that is a woman in industry who I look up to, who's my senior. They're all men, but I still look up to them and still meet with them, and we still have not consistent, but once in a while I'll get lunch with somebody who is one of my seniors who works at Novartis, a different company, and they'll kind of give me like a summary of what they do and like what things are expected of them or what I should do with my career. For instance, when I was thinking about switching jobs, I met with a friend who was a senior scientist in Novartis, and he kind of laid out for me, like, these are the opportunities that you have. This is where you need to grow. If you want to get to this position that I'm at, these are the things that you need to do. And it was very black and white, and it was nothing that it was, we don't have this consistent relationship or mentorship. It's just reach out to the people when you need them. You don't need to have like a defined, this is my mentor. I mean, that works out great, but I can't even think of somebody who I would say, oh, they're my mentor. I just go to the people who I know who are in my business and get what I can from them.
Hi. Okay. I was just wondering if there's ever been a time where, like, in your job or currently, that someone's ever like put you down or felt like discouraged you, and like if there has been, like, what have you done about that?
Yeah, I have a good example of that. My Ph.D. advisor, he's no longer in academia, but I had this really great opportunity. I actually went to a conference, and it was a very kind of prestigious conference, and my boss was surprised that I got invited to it. So I went, did a poster, met some people there, and I met a professor who really, like, we kind of got each other, and he was just very helpful. It was a really good, easygoing conversation. He knew that I was looking for postdocs. So he ended up, without my knowledge, reaching out to somebody who's really big in the field. I worked on something called photosynthesis, and there was this god who was known in the field down in Texas at Baylor, who was his mentor, which I didn't know. And he reached out to him, and then this professor reached out to me and said, hey, come here and interview for a postdoc, which is kind of like cream of the crop. I don't know, I didn't even have a paper published. And my boss just said, well, I don't support you going to work for him. And I was devastated, so I had to take this plane ride down. I had to literally stand in the mirror and pump myself up that I can do this, just fake your way through it, pretend that you're a good chemist, get the presentation over with and come back, and, you know, tail between your legs. And I ended up doing okay during the presentation, and he did offer me the job, and it turns out that there was a lot of politics behind it, and my Ph.D. advisor wanted to work for that guy when he went to grad school, and he was upset with me that I got the opportunity that he didn't. And I found that out later and was so disappointed. But it made me feel better about why he actually wrote an email to him and said, I don't support this student going to work for you. And he still gave me the job. So that was a bummer. But, I put those things, I'm never going to forget it. There are certain things that happen to you in your career that you'll never forget. But I still talk with my Ph.D. advisor, and we're cordial. You always want to keep good relationships with people, and sometimes people make mistakes, and not everyone's doing the right thing 100% of the time. But you're never going to forget those really bad instances.
Yeah. I can think of when I decided to leave my first job after college. And so I came in, I had a mechanical engineering degree and like a little bit of coding experience, and I wanted to work my way through some junior software engineering roles into like a full-fledged software engineering role. And I had been working and working and working at this for 2 or 2.5 years. And I had encountered, I was doing okay. I wasn't doing terribly. I was hitting challenges and I was working through them. This is like what you do in a job. But my manager said, I just don't think you're cut out for software engineering, and I think we're going to transfer you to a different division where you might be more successful. I had no say in the decision. It was not a division I had expressed interest in before. And I realized that the person who had a lot of control over my career had no investment in my success. So at that point, I had been sensing that something was off, and I had been interviewing for jobs. I hadn't quite decided if I was going to leave my company, so it was like I was pulled towards new jobs, but I wasn't getting pushed out of my current job. I was just like, this is the push that I needed. So I was very, very lucky in that I, the next day, got the job offer that I ended up accepting. And so I didn't have to worry about my employment security. And I was able to make that decision because I was pretty confident in that. But I realized that someone who had a lot of power over my situation wasn't supportive of me and didn't care about my success. He instead cared about his own visibility and like how it looks to have an employee who was, killing it versus doing normal. So that was a decision that I made.
So I've been in meetings where people that are above me have sometimes challenged without a basis what I've said. And like sometimes that can feel personal. And I can feel like, yes, this is a put down, or this person really doesn't respect me and doesn't care at all that I've got all of this data to back up the thing that I'm saying, and just sort of like superimposing their opinion because they happen to be higher in the hierarchy. So how do I deal with it? The thing that I need to remind myself is like, this is not personal. He's got an opinion, and all I need to do is understand where he's coming from. I don't know why I need to say he. Obviously, they're all he. Where they're coming from. And that helps sort of de-escalate this and make it it's just an engineering thing, right? What's your point of view? Maybe I don't need to ask it in the meeting. I can ask afterwards, hey, we were discussing this thing. This is why I said what I said. So can you help me understand what your viewpoint was, and how can we work together so that maybe next time before the meeting we are both on the same page and we're not challenging each other where we really don't need to be. We can be on like, yes, this is how we're going to get it done.
I don't have a good example for this. Pass.
How do you know when is going to be a time for a change in your kind of like work field? Like, when do you know that, oh yeah, you've been there for quite a bit, so I might have to go somewhere else or like apply for another job?
I think it stops being interesting. You start finding ways to do all the things you have to do and get out of your boss's hair so you can leave the office earlier and go do something more interesting. And I think there's something to be said about, leaving the office and work-life balance and things like that. But all of a sudden, you're just finding ways to just get it done so you don't have to think about it until the next morning when you come back. And you deserve more than that. So if you find yourself thinking of it as a chore instead of as this interesting, amazing thing that you can do for like 6 or 8 or 10 hours a day, then it's time to go find the exciting thing again. And I think maybe you don't recognize that, or for me personally, the recognition that I'm bored and that I need something else always happens much later than the action. So usually I'm already applying for jobs or trying to get a different role within my company. And then I have that meta recognition of, oh, I'm bored and this is why I'm seeking change.
I think that you should always be in a position where you're growing. No matter what that is in your role, there should always be a step up. Even if you're at a smaller company where there may not be an actual title jump, you should always be learning something in your job. You shouldn't be robotically doing the same thing over again. And there's always going to be parts of the job that you need to do that, but there should be another part where it's focused on your professional development and growth. And it's within the best interests of your company to want to promote that for you. So a good company should want you to progress, to be a better chemist in my instance. And you should make sure that you join a company that at least is looking for that. And sometimes that can change. Sometimes they have all these potential growth opportunities, but that may stop or things may change. There's a lot of fluidity in the market. There's startups, then they disappear. There's companies that have been here for a long time, and then the culture changes. So I think you just need to keep an eye on what you need personally, and I think just growth, always getting to that next step, because I constantly have LinkedIn open. I'm always looking at jobs just to see what's out there, and I always have my CV on my desktop. You should always be updating that, just because you never know when something's going to happen. Your company may go under, or there's a new opportunity that just, like I wasn't looking to move my last company, but a new opportunity came my way.
Just to kind of agree with that sometimes it's not even changing companies, but just changing within your company or within your job, to find somewhere where you can grow and be passionate again, so that you're not just going through the motions.
Did you study statistics? At what level? How much of it? How's it used at work, and is it useful?
I took one class of statistics, but I wish I took more.
Yeah, I echo that. So I took an undergrad class. I thought it was interesting, and somehow, because computer science and all these other things never got around to more of it, I think statistics and more generally math is super important in computer science. You wouldn't believe how important it is. And just comes up in all sorts of random places. I mean, statistics actually, or perhaps now I'm not going to be completely accurate in like what branch of mathematics this is, but so for example, I said I work in self-driving cars, right? We have to worry a lot about what are the failure rates of things, and what are the exposures to these different failure scenarios, and how do we make sure that all of the things that we're doing will go and address all of these different failures. How do I understand that I've driven enough miles with my robot that I can statistically confidently say that I have a certain failure rate, right? Like if I drive 5 miles and I have no problems, does that tell me something about how I'm going to do when I drive billions of miles? I mean, how do I even figure out these questions? I need people from statistics.
So I took AP statistics in high school. It's been a while. And I use it a lot. But what I end up doing is going to the College Board website and seeing what the rubric is for AP statistics, and then I read through the topics and I remember the name of the topic that I want to go Google, and then I find the Wikipedia article and re-educate myself. I don't remember a lot of the details, but I know the concepts enough to know that I need to go re-educate myself in order to make this graph or do this analysis or answer this question. So I think it's about building the library in your mind of concepts that you can go and retouch into or re-educate yourself on when you need to touch into that knowledge.
So I've never taken a statistics class, but I recognize the importance of it because we have a whole department in my company that's all bioanalytics, and all the data that we looked at is based on good stats. If the data is not right, and I have to make a compound based on that compound being good, it's going to waste all of our time and resources. And we've had some instances where an assay, and not to anybody's fault, we always kind of look with a flashlight on our own data, so that's why this is very important to focus on the numbers, where the error bars that you see within an assay in your own mind don't look like they're, or in your mind you want them to be significant, so therefore they are significant, but when you really dig into the data and you look at the raw numbers, it's not significant. So there's been some serious issues with some assays in our in-house development where statistics has been like absolutely critical.
Thank you. How did you choose to accept your current job? What were the parts of it that appealed to you that made you choose it over something else and made you decide to stay?
So my current job I was recruited into, and I had a really hard time leaving. So I don't know if any of you know Jeanette Medina here. So her husband, Julio Medina, owns a company called R2M. He used to work at Amgen, and he started this small startup, and that was the company that I worked for. And I absolutely loved it. I joined the company because of him and the way that he was running his business, and it was very small, and the project specifically that they were working on, which is opioid rescue therapies. And I was at that job for about a year and 4 months and was recruited by somebody who I worked with at that company to MyoKardia. And I told them, the recruiter, no at first, and then they said, just come, you can even think of it as a practice interview. We think you'll like what we're doing here. So, and I felt some serious loyalty. I really loved the company that I was at. So I went anyways, thinking just practice, and I ended up being kind of blown away by the opportunities that they had there. Just being a bigger company, there was more areas for professional development, and being a young scientist one in the field, there was only so far I could get with the company that I was at. So they kind of offered this open door to opportunities that I didn't even know existed because of the current company I was at. So it was a super tough decision. I cried about it a lot. It's hard to know if things are the right move, but once you make the move, that's the road you're on, and you go forward. And I'm obviously still here and talk to Jeanette, and we still have a really great relationship. And things move, things are fluid. You're going to see the same faces again, so depending on what field you're in, your reputation is super important. So I know of chemists who I've never met, and I know of their reputations, so that's really important. So making moves becomes easier, and getting promoted becomes easier if you have a good reputation.
Yeah, I chose my current job because I thought I had something that I could learn, and that was correct. So I work in product development. Specifically, my title is that I'm a product manager, but I love the challenge of understanding a problem that someone has in their life, and they may not even realize that it's a problem, and ideating and building something that solves that problem for them. I love that technology is also a big part of this, and technology is bringing innovation to these industries that previously had no innovation. For example, I work in the trucking industry, so we're helping people plan for which trucks are going to carry which loads and deliver which routes, and make sure that the drivers aren't having to drive 26 hours in a 24-hour day. And it's really cool because these things used to be done literally on pencil and paper, and now they're being done leveraging artificial intelligence and leveraging algorithms, and it's really beneficial to the industry. But back to what I could learn. I felt like my previous company, felt like we were moving in circles with the product. We weren't actually solving the core users' problems. We kept having the same things come up year over year of things that were challenging, things that we were struggling with, things that we were making excuses for, and I felt like we were half-assing the efforts to resolve those. And when I made the leap, I looked at the company that I work at currently, and the founders had founded a previous company and sold that for more than $1 billion. And I was like, well, they did something right. It's not about the money, but it's about making a thing that's useful enough that someone wants to pay a lot of money for it and continues to distribute it and sell it. So I made the leap because I wanted to learn, and I've learned so much. I've learned so many good practices. I've learned how to ask the hard questions and be comfortable with the hard answers. And I think the thing that's made me stay above anything else is both the vice president who took me on as a mentee and my manager. He's just an ally in the truest sense of the word. I don't think he realizes he's an ally. He just wants good for everyone. And he just looks out for me in this really fantastic way. And I enjoy going to work, which feels really novel and special.
So the biggest reason that I decided to change jobs was this search for meaning, the search for I want to build something and do something that matters not just to me when I'm old, but matters to people. And self-driving is this really great industry that has this promise of not just making people's lives better, but actually saving lives. And there's not many things that I could do in computer science that eventually finally could help save lives and make cities and entire lives, make an impact on those. So I was doing something similar in the job that I was at, And then I knew about this really tiny startup. Like, it was literally 15 people operating out of a firehouse, like an abandoned firehouse on the campus on Slack, the linear accelerator. And it was just this like crazy ambitious idea of building the whole robot from scratch and doing fully autonomous driving, no humans, doing a robotaxi service in San Francisco. And so, wow, like that is something that I want to be a part of, right? Like, if we can actually achieve that, and I can go and say, like, hey, I was part of this team that built this thing. That was an amazing, amazing thought. And then just day to day, just the experience of being here and working here is really exciting. I mean, artificial intelligence is this really fun, really promising field, which is the part that I'm working in. So I work in computer vision and deep learning. So every day is fun, and it's a challenge. What we're trying to do is amazing. There's no reason to think about moving anywhere else.
So I can echo what they said in terms of following your passion and being open to doing new things. And I like that you have your CD on your computer all the time. That's kind of cool. Just allowing yourself the opportunity to grow, because your real loyalty is to yourself, not to your other company's stuff, as long as you're not burning bridges. My most recent move, though, however, had to do nothing with that. It was because of family situation, and we had to move. And so I think that also tells a story that sometimes there's no super right path that you have to go on. That I had to move from one job to another just for family reasons, and was able to find an awesome situation here and make really the most of it. So sometimes other factors may pull you from a job as well.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. So through this panel, I realized that we have two major problems. One is that women are being discouraged from getting into STEM, and two is that women in STEM are having problems staying in STEM, functioning in STEM. So I was wondering, what is more important, do you think, is to fill the space with more women so that the space conforms to how they want to function, or to maybe change the system and change the procedure so more women are attracted to STEM so that they're able to function in that society?
I want to caveat this, but I don't research education or educational theory. There's a lot of people who do. In fact, I remember professors when I was in undergrad who researched this and just studied the problem of, like, how do we get women who study STEM to stay in STEM. But my gut thought is it fair to try to push a lot more people into an environment that people currently are finding unfair or intolerable? And I don't think the answer is yes. Whereas in my ideological mind, if we make that environment really favorable and really attractive, that there's a lot of growth that can happen, there's a lot of job flexibility, because that's what happens in STEM, and you're going to feel included, you're going to have a really great environment, really great colleagues, then all of a sudden will create this like magnetic pull into that environment. And I'd like to think that that's the case, but I would love if someone has the opposite opinion.
Yes.
So I think there is nothing, at least that I have felt, that is really repulsive about our environment. Like, yes, there's these microaggressions, and it's definitely, like physically sometimes it's just different, right? Like, it's just not meant for us because nobody thought about it. But by and large, I think it's actually a great industry. So I want to believe that if women just considered it again and really thought about the careers that they could have in this field, and they came to it, and there was enough of us here, that is all it would take, right? You just need this critical mass. If there was enough women here, I don't think that there's inherently any problems in the environment as it currently stands. But it's just sometimes there's no other woman, and you feel sort of left out, you have nobody to go talk to, and maybe that partly, makes you drop out.
So I think one of the most important things to me, and let me preface this with, I love working with men. I think it's great. I learned so much from just their behavioral differences. Completely different when I was in the classroom and it was, predominantly women. I really think that this is a cultural change. So on top of political and structural changes that need to happen, like parental leave is a huge problem. Women don't become professors because they have to choose between, do I want to get tenure and do I want to have a family? And men do too, but when we don't have these institutional dynamics set up that's culturally there, where people are like, yeah, have a great maternity and paternity leave, it's more like, oh, they're not going to get tenure because they just had 2 kids. So I think there's a big cultural change that really needs to happen alongside all of the political changes that we need. And that's happening over time, but that's something that like we, as me and you, only have so much control over. And I think another big part of it is men are probably the most important thing for men being allies that I can think of. Because and I just want to say it's great to see so many men here, because usually I come to these events and it's like maybe 2 men and mostly women. So kudos to you guys for coming, because I think you're probably for me the most important part of this is just having allies and asking questions and not being afraid to ask like how we work differently. Sometimes there's just the slightest little differences that make the entire culture discomfortable. And when you ask somebody about their job and if they like it or not, they can sometimes list you some very specific details, but most of the time it's just like, that's not a great place to work. The culture is really competitive, it's not welcoming, it's not great. So I think that's a huge part of it, is just asking questions and not being afraid to have differences. Like we're all different, and it's not just men and women. We're leaving out a whole other group of people. We're not even talking about LGBT, trans people. Like there's other people in between that we all need to consider differences. And I can give you one quick example of I got really embarrassed when I was at a STEM, Women in STEM, was physics get together at UC Berkeley, and we were with a group of people and we were doing some sort of like icebreaker. And I went to introduce the woman next to me. I said, oh, I just met her, she's in physics. And she said, they. And I said, I didn't know what to say. I've never experienced that before. I didn't know that I was being insulting. And I turned to her and I asked, like, what do you mean? Like, did you mean more than one of you? I had no idea what she meant. And she corrected me and said, oh no, my pronoun is they. And I said, okay, cool, I'm really sorry. I was super embarrassed. My face got really red, and I said, I just started explaining they were in this department, and it was totally cool. And I asked her later, thank you so much for saying that, and I was really embarrassed, but it was something that, like, I learned from that, and now I'm aware of it, and I'm going to go forward being aware of that.
All right, I think we have time for one more. Any last burning questions? All right.
So, do you guys believe in more of a meritocratic system where you get benefits or move up based on your performance in a company, or is it more another system? Like, which one would be better? I kind of forgot what the other one was. I think seniority, yeah.
So absolutely, it has to be based on merit, right? And I think, I want to believe that mostly we do this, right? Like in industry, I have seen that people, even if they're younger, and perhaps this more often in computer science, just because they're younger doesn't mean that they're going to get passed up for an opportunity if they're doing really, really well. I've seen people sort of accelerate through their careers and get to be managers, directors, whatever, even though they're much younger. I mean, you've all heard about these stories of really, really young CTOs, CEOs, 20-year-olds, right? And it's all because of merit. So I think that is the right approach.
I'll also just give you a peek into when you work in industry. Most established companies have performance reviews, which is basically a report card of how you do your job, which helps enforce a meritocratic system, because you can go and you can say, okay, we have these 12 things that a person in this job should do well. We have one promotion to give. Let's see who has been doing the best amongst these 12 things for the longest amount of time. They're most deserving of the promotion, and that's how you can evaluate merit. So I think, at least in my experience in industry, when we do these structured performance reviews, it helps enforce a meritocratic promotion cycle rather than a seniority-based promotion cycle.
I can add a quick difference to that, because I think about this question a lot. So postdocs are just a training that you do after graduate work, and they're pretty much work as hard as you can for as long as you can to get out papers and information to get that next job. So I'm going to give you an example of 2 postdocs that were in my lab. One was a single man, and he worked 24/7. He was always there. He did really great work, great scientist. Another was a woman who was a single mother, and she was there as much as she possibly could, but obviously there's limits with that, and she was equal, like, great scientist. And the question comes up when it comes to providing opportunities for those 2 people who are, one person has more of an opportunity to spend in the lab than the other, so that person who could be there all the time does more work, so they therefore have more merit and they should be raised up. And I just want to pose that to you of what do you think is, you know, the right way to do things, because if we really want equality, not in terms of equal, I think if that woman could be there as much as that man, she could achieve the same things. So I think it's just important that, you know, the advisor give both people equal opportunity as long as they're reaching a set bar. So if you are coming to the standards of you're putting in your, say, 8 hours a day and you're meeting expectations, then maybe you should offer the same opportunities to both and not just say, oh, this guy's here all the time, so I'm going to give him the opportunity to go to this conference and present work. So just food for thought.
How do we evaluate merit, not based off of achievement, but instead based off of potential? Because the situation, both people have the same potential, one has just had the opportunity to achieve more. Interesting question.
So perhaps not so much in postdoc, but even in the industry, this happens a lot, right? There's women and even men that have families and lives and children, and at a certain time have to go back. And yeah, so it's hard, how do you evaluate them versus like a 20-year-old that just is fresh out of college? And I think it's sort of like, what is the quality of the work that you're producing? So you don't need to be working like all the time. And at some point, you know, you can sustain like working really hard because you have a deadline. And I will do that, right? Like I will be like, okay, here's my kid, my husband takes care of him, I'll work nights and weekends and whatever, but you cannot sustain it and you will burn out. Even if I didn't have a kid, I couldn't sustain that forever. So when I evaluate somebody over a year's worth of performance, it sort of is like, you know, how passionate are they? How well have they been able to do the job that was given to them? Just like in everything that they did they try to push hard? Did they, you know, hold themselves to a high standard? So it's not just about hard work. And I think more and more people do realize that. So it's not just like blind hours, but something a bit more than that.
Excellent, thank you so much. And this is going to be the end of our panel, but before we say goodbye, I'd like all of the women in STEM community to stand up real quick. And I wanted to thank you all for your hard work in putting this event together. Can we get a round of applause? Thank you. And then let's give a warm round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you so much for being here. We do have a few surprises for you. We have succulents for everybody because they're really hard to kill, from what I understand. Thank you so much, everybody. Please feel free to come up and ask questions. Thank you so